All right, so clearly I'm not in class. My wife is having surgery today, so I am with her, and didn't want to cancel class because I want to keep us going forward, and there's just too much stuff to cover if we start canceling classes. So we're going to do it this way. Andrew is there, right there. I'm assuming that might be the wrong direction. Maybe it's that way. But Andrew is here to help help you understand this material if you run into problems. The exams are graded. I'll get those posted if they're not already posted by now. You may see your grades are right now, and then the and then we're going to cover the current lecture that we're working on. Check sections 34, 36, 37, I believe. We'll see that as we kind of go through. Okay, so a couple things about the exam. One, you need to put down your formulas. There are so many people who lost easy points because they didn't write down their formulas. If it's a mean, you write down sum of x over n. If you're just showing me your final number, you sometimes lost a couple points, easy points. So make sure you put down the formula, show me your work. That's just as important as the final answer. So make sure you're doing that. A lot of you didn't use your free statistics help question, and you probably should have, because there are some of you that got stuck on a big question that if you got help, I could have walked you through it, and you could have got 5 or 6, 7, 8 more points on the exam. So use those things because they're there to help. Make sure you include your formulas, and make sure you show your work. And I can answer more questions about the exam when I get back, okay? All right, I'm going to pause this, and then I'll be back in a second. Okay, so we are going to cover, let's share this screen with you, the calculation of Pearson R. Like I've said before, this is a bit of a big formula for calculation, okay? It's probably the scariest formula. Let's go ahead and put it on the screen here in a second. But it's simple if you walk through the steps. And that's what I'm going to do today, is walk you through those steps. So to compute the Pearson R, and actually let me do this. Let me get a pointer. So to compute the Pearson R, we're only going to discuss the computational formula. The definitional formula involves z-scores. It's kind of complicated. But the formula itself is R, which is Pearson, divided by this big giant number. Now you're going to say, oh my goodness, I can't do this. But you can, and we're going to walk through it step by step by step. And you need to do it step by step to be able to do this correctly. So x refers to your scores on the x variable. You're going to have two variables. You're going to have a score here, and you're going to have a score here. You're going to have an x, you're going to have a y. You're going to calculate both. So you're going to x and y. Sum of x refers to the sum of all your x's. The sum of y refers to sum of all your y's. You're going to multiply your x by your y. You're going to take each x, you're going to square it, and then add those up. And you're going to take each y, you're going to square it, you're going to add those up. And so that's kind of represented down here in those components there. But let's look at an example, because I think that's the easiest way to do this. So to use this formula, you must first pick which one is going to be an x, which one's going to be a y. It does not matter. It doesn't matter if you decide to go variable of anxiety as x and the variable of performance as y, or you flip them. You will get the exact same answer both ways. Typically, it's customary to designate the first one you measured as x and the second one as y. Doesn't matter. It'll probably be set up for this for you whenever we're doing homework, so you don't really have to worry about that much, but it doesn't matter. You get the same answer regardless. You can't get overwhelmed by this formula, right? It's very easy to do that, to get overwhelmed by this formula. I'm going to try a different pointer. Let's see if that. So don't get overwhelmed. It's very easy to get overwhelmed by this formula, right? You're going to start. Now, how do I clear that? There we go. Learning new stuff all the time. Maybe highlighter would be better. Yeah, that's fine. What if I can change the colors? Okay. We're focusing on the wrong things while I'm recording. So one, you're going to put your data into a table. You got to put it into a table, otherwise you're not going to be able to do this. You're going to compute each column in the table one step at a time. 1, 2, 3. You're going to walk through this. You're going to write down the formula. Like I said, a lot of you, I don't know how many percent, probably 25% or more, on this last test forgot to write down formulas and you gave up easy points. It's a requirement. You're going to have to learn how to do that. And then you're going to replace each component. Some of you didn't do that on the test either, so make sure you do that. And then you're going to calculate the formula in a stepwise fashion. Stepwise, small steps. That's what we're working on. Small steps, a little bit at a time. Okay? So you're always going to start with the table. All right, you have your X here. You have your Y here. Okay, so got lost track there. I had to pause this there for a second. So you have your X, you have your Y, right? You have different people. You have a Bill score, and he has 2 scores. He has a 5 and a 0. So whatever X is, he has a score. Whatever Y is, he has a score. Liz has 2 scores, a 7 and a 4. Carol has 2 scores, a 0 and a 9. And so you can see that for each person, they have an X score, they have a Y score. At the very end, you can sum those numbers up, right? You can start by summing up those numbers, right? You can sum up those numbers. That's a sum right there. Sum of those numbers is what you're doing. You're going to take your X and you're going to square it, okay? So if we, this is not an easy option to erase this stuff. Sorry, guys. So you're going to take your X and you're going to square it, right? So you're taking each X. 5 squared is 25. 7 squared is 49. 0 squared is 0. 1 squared is 1. 4 squared is 16. 2 squared is 4. And you're going to add those up, okay? Then you're going to do the same thing for Y. You're going to take each of your Y and you're going to square it. So 0 squared is 0. 4 squared is 16. 9 squared is 81. 7 squared is 49. All the way up. You're going to add those numbers all up. So you're adding all these numbers up here to get that number right there. Okay? Then you're going to take each X, multiply by each Y. So you're going to take your 5, you're going to multiply it by your 0. Right? So 5 times 0 is 0. 7 times 4 is 28. 0 times 9 is 0. 1 times 7 is 7. 4 times 5 is 20. 2 times 6 is 12. And then when you add all those up, you got scores here, okay? So at the end, at the end of doing a very simple table, you're going to take your X's, which are given. You're going to take your Y's, which are given. You're going to add up both of those. You're going to take each X. You're going to square it, add those up. You're going to take each Y. You're going to square it, add those up. You're going to take each X, multiply by each Y, and add those all up. And you're going to come up with these numbers down here at the bottom, which are all the numbers that you now need for that formula. So already we're 2 steps into that formula. We've got the formula which we can write down, and then we can replace all those scores that are in there, okay? You have to do this in a stepwise fashion. Have to do it as a stepwise fashion, okay? Then we replace the components in the formula with the relevant values, right? So this is our formula, right? What is the number of scores we have? Say it out loud. All right, thank you, good job. I don't know who said that, but good job. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 scores, right? N is the number of pairs of scores, not the individual scores, but how many people are in the study. Bill, Liz, Carol, Stu, Frank, and Brandy. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 people in the study. So you have your scores, and the first thing you do is you put all those numbers in, right? Write down your blank formula. Step 1. Step 2, remember The sum of x squared is not the same as the sum of x bracket squared. So this value here is not the same as this value. Those are different values, right? Sum of x we're getting from our numbers here is 19. Sum of x squared is 95. So when we go forward to the next phase, sum of x squared is 95. Sum of x bracket squared is 19, then you have to square that number. And some of you made that error when you calculated your standard deviation. Remember, underneath you have this square root, right? You're square rooting all of that stuff underneath. It's very easy to drop your square root. A couple of you did that on the exam, and that's a very common error as well that you'll see. So these scores are where you're getting stuff, right? You have your 19, which is here, right? You have your 31, which is going up here. That's just the sum of your x, your sum of your y, and so on, okay? Be careful, go through step by step, right? 19 is replacing anywhere you see sum of x. 19's up there, 19's here. Sum of y, 31 is going up here, it's going here, right? 31, 31. The sum of x squared is going in that sum of x squared spot, which is right there, 95. Sum of y squared is 207, it's going right here, 207. And then your x by y is going into that x by y up on top, right? So 67, 67. So at this phase, the math has not been difficult, right? You've calculated these columns, and then you filled in the numbers. That's 2/3 or, at least half of the way through the problem. Now, this is where you take your time and go through step by step by step through the calculation. 1, show your work. 6 times 67, this right here gets translated into this, 402. 19 times 31 gets translated into this, 589. Okay? That's on top. Then on the bottom, 6 times 95 is 570. 19 squared is 361. 6 times 207 is 1242. So this becomes this. This squared becomes this. And so you're just doing that one step at a time. That's what I mean by showing your work. And this is what I mean by going step by step through the formula. You can have a negative number. And in fact, the negative number up top, when you see a negative number like right there, what that's telling you is that you're going to have a negative correlation. Remember, negative correlation means one goes up, one goes down. Okay? So 402 minus 589 is 187. 570 minus 361 is 209. 1242 minus 961 is 281. And then you multiply those together. So you just carry the negative 187 on top, and then 209 multiplied by 281 is 58729. Then you have to square root that number, and then you get 242, and then you divide those two things, and you get a negative. Remember your negative. Remember to carry that negative through all the way through once it happens. Remember to carry your square root all the way through, because you drop that square root a lot of times. And then that gives you this final answer here, which then becomes this when you round. And that is your final answer, negative 0.77. I'm not going to lie to you. It's a long formula. It's going to take you some time to go through it. And it's not going to always be easy. You got to go take your time, go step by step, and double check yourself. Right? If you've done this, go back through and say, did I follow through? Did I make sure I carried my negatives? Did I make sure I followed my square roots all the way through? Okay. This number will not be above a negative 1.0 or below, or above a plus 1.0 or below a negative 1.0. It has to be between -1 and +1. Remember, that is the boundaries of a correlation. If you have a number that falls outside that range, you've made an error. So our answer was 0.77. So what does that mean? First off, we see that it's a negative value, so that we know that our relationship is an inverse or negative relationship. That means as x's go up, y's go down, okay? So as y decreases, as x increases. these are only a small number of scores, you can do a quick check of it by kind of placing everything in order and kind of seeing that that's the case, that high X's have low Y's, okay? If you look at those scores, if you kind of just put them in order, you put all your X's in order and all your Y's in order, you can kind of see the low X's have high Y's and so on, okay? By doing this, you see that as scores on X's increase, Y scores decrease. Remember that a negative value of an R means an inverse relationship. A positive value of R means a direct relationship. The absolute value, that's what those two lines mean, obtained. So it doesn't mean whether, regardless of whether it's negative or positive, means that the closer the value is to 1, the closer the value is to 1, the stronger that value is. Another check when doing your calculation is that if the value of R is going to be negative, it's the top number that's going to show it as negative. The bottom will never be negative. If you have a negative number, if you have a negative number on the bottom here, then you've made an error, and you won't. The negative or positive will happen on that top value. And like I said, it'll be that boundary between -1 and +1. That's the only score you can get. If you get a -1.2 correlation, you've made an error because it can only be between -1 and +1. Pearson R can only be calculated on interval or ratio data. And if we have ordinal data or rankings, we can do something called a Spearman's correlation, but we're not going to talk about that in this class. And so really what we're doing is we're only going to be doing Pearson's R. And remember, that goes from -1 all the way to +1, right, with 0 in the middle. Okay, and if you have a 1.2 negative, you've made an error. If you have a plus 1.04, you've made an error. It will only be between these two values, between the -1 and the +1. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. So one more practice of running through stuff, and then we're going to stop this lecture, and I'll do up a second one for the rest of the class because I want to make sure these aren't too big. So what's the first step? X and Y's. What's the first thing we have to do? Right, we have to square each X, we have to square each Y, and we have to multiply each X by each Y. So we take each X, we square it. We take each Y, we square it. We take each X by Y and we multiply it together. 1 times 5 is 5. 3 times 9 is 27. 1 squared is 1. 5 squared is 25. Once we get all our values here, we then plug those into our formulas. Right? Write down our blank formula. 21 goes anywhere where there's a sum of X. Sum of X, sum of X. Right? 21, 21. Our Y is 40. Right, so anywhere there's a Y, sum of Y, sum of Y, we put that in there. That's the 40 and the 40. Our sum of Y, X, Y squared is coming from right here, 252, 252. Our sum of X squared is coming right here, 85, and that's 85. And then our sum of X, Y up top is 119. N is always the number of pairs of scores. 1 pair, 2 pairs, 3 pairs, 4 pairs, 5 pairs, 6 pairs, 7 pairs. So 7 equals Rn, right? Which is the number of pairs. It's kind of hard to write like that, but you get the sense, okay? All right, so I believe that is all for that first section. That is a big one. Spend some time on this. Take your time, go through that formula. Ask Andrew if you have any questions. You're going to have lots of time to practice this. Take your time, put it in a full table. You have to do it in a table. I want to see you do it in a table. And then take your time on filling in the formulas, okay? So that is all for this first part. I will do a part 2 of this lecture, and we'll see you in a few minutes.